Good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar presentation on the Commission's Consumptive Use Mitigation Grant Program. My name is John Bala. I'm the Manager of Planning and Operations here at the Commission, and I'm joined here with several of my colleagues, Andrew Dayhoff, our Executive Director, Andy Gavin, our Deputy Executive Director, Jason Euler, General Counsel, Stacy Hanrahan, our Communication and Outreach Specialist, Julian Mazzaro and Pierre McCoy of our grant program team, and then Bryden Lytle and Mike Schweitzer of our IT staff providing support till we get up and running. So we plan to kick things off here with some logistics about today's webinar. Right out of the gate, please note that the webinar is being recorded, and that's primarily to allow us to post it to our website for participants that couldn't make today's session or our second webinar session on December 8th. We ask that you kindly mute all lines just to allow us to get through the presentation material and have plenty of space at the end of the session for Q&A. The presentation will likely run about 20 to 30 minutes, and again, so we'll have plenty of time for questions and answers after the presentation. We ask that you use the chat function in Zoom to pose your questions, and that'll allow us to compile them internally here in the room and do our best to work through and answer as many of those as we can. We'll try to answer as many questions as we get today, but certainly if you have any follow-up questions or you feel like your question wasn't answered in a satisfactory manner, feel free to send any follow-up questions to the email account and dedicated phone extension posted here. They just allow us to handle inquiries and questions in a standardized fashion and make sure that we're tracking and closing out each of those that we receive. So with that, I'm to kick us off, Andrew Dayhoff, our Executive Director, is here to give a very brief welcome and some opening remarks before we get into today's discussion. Drew?
Thanks, John. Good morning, everybody. As you can all see, there's over 30 participants with us this morning, so appreciate your interest. As you're probably aware, we're kicking off our second year of the Consumptive Use Mitigation Grant, and we are inspired and excited to offer this grant opportunity again, due in large part to the success we saw in year one last year. Viewpoint of staff is that with the 14 projects we selected last year, we entered into a diverse and a very interesting group of innovative efforts that are achieving tangible results and building resiliency and sustainability, and also that are offering benefits to our partners, both existing partners and new. So we look forward to another successful year, continuing to build those partnerships, continuing to accrue knowledge of the on-the-ground efforts that can prove most productive in achieving our collective resource management goals. So thanks again for your interest, and I hope you find today's session informative.
Great, thank you, Drew. Appreciate that. All right, so here's an agenda that outlines the key topics we'll cover in today's session, at least in summary fashion. I'll note, and we can't emphasize this enough, these topics are covered in depth in our grant program guidelines. That's available on our website and linked, and the link is included in several slides in today's talk. And really, that document is intended to be a guide for all applicants in considering and preparing an application for submission to the Commission. Just to get us warmed up, and for folks on the line not intimately familiar with our agency, this slide provides some background context. We're a bit unique in that we're a federal interstate compact commission. You could see the watershed on the right shows our jurisdiction, the 27,500 and some square mile watershed. Our member jurisdictions are represented by commissioners appointed from to the north in New York State, Pennsylvania, with the largest land coverage in the basin, Maryland in the south, and then the United States government, and in our case, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, North Atlantic Division Commander. Our mission is spelled out there to enhance public welfare through comprehensive planning, water supply allocation, which gets at our regulatory role, and then just general management of water resources of this basin. Obviously, this Consumptive Use Mitigation Grant Program is one pathway to allow us to advance our mission. In terms of an introduction to what consumptive water use is and mitigation of consumptive use, we have some bullets here. Basically, we're talking about water withdrawn from our basin that's not returned, at least undiminished in quantity. So think about, obviously, diversions of water outside the drainage, water that's evaporated and lost through cooling towers. Think about water that's incorporated into the products like soda, yogurt, and so forth that's not returned would be examples of consumptive uses. Early on in our regulatory background, we had a requirement and continue to have a requirement for projects to provide mitigation for the consumptive use. And the main aim of that is to avoid impacts, particularly during low flow and drought periods. We've been at this consumptive use mitigation goal or aim for some time and have been successful at implementing many projects or several projects over the years. Our adoption of a consumptive use mitigation policy in 2020 really was a milestone, and it did a number of things, but in particular of relevance to the grant program was it expanded the scope of alternatives, the types of projects we could undertake for mitigation. And that policy really paved the way for the Consumptive Use Mitigation Grant Program we issued for the first time November 1 last year, and as Drew mentioned in his opening remarks, are coming around with a year 2 offering this year. Ultimately, the purpose of the grant program is to attract and fund projects to mitigate for consumptive use or otherwise improve drought resiliency, drought conditions in the Susquehanna. This has, again, been a long-standing aim of ours, but really the grant program opens up some new opportunities to leverage external ideas, expertise, resources, funding to accelerate implementation of projects on the ground. The purpose, the main scope of the grant program has remained the same in year 2 as it was in year 1, although we have made some refinements and enhancements to hopefully make the process and the program more efficient and effective to implement on our end, but also for applicants in completing an application. In terms of the eligible applicants that are spelled out in the grant program guidelines, again, these are the same as those spelled out in year 1. They include project sponsors, and what we mean by that are the owners, operators of projects that have dockets or other approvals from our agency. Obviously, government entities are eligible, and so are nonprofits and academicians. They're the 4 main classes of eligible applicants listed in the guidelines. Certainly, a non-eligible applicant, say a consultant, for instance, could certainly partner with one of these eligible applicants and prepare and submit an application as a partnership. And we've seen that many times in the year 1 applications received. This slide outlines the eligible project types for funding under the program. We've referred to these as the project categories or project bins. And I'll provide in the subsequent slides an example of a project in each of these categories. But basically, we have water supply alternatives, so think about projects that secure water supply storage at reservoirs, quarries, mine pools for low flow management purposes. Project operations that don't necessarily produce or result in extra water supply storage, but change operations to be more sustainable during drought conditions. An example of that would be conjunctive use of both groundwater and surface water sources to have a more sustainable operation during droughts. The demand modification bin is really the one focused on water conservation, reuse, recycling efforts. And then the last category, environmental and water quality alternatives, is perhaps broadest in scope, perhaps most representative of some alternative consumptive use mitigation approaches, and includes things like abandoned mine drainage remediation, stormwater management, particularly with groundwater recharge component, and another general environmental improvement project types. So to start us off with our first of four project examples, this one being in the water supply category, here on this slide we're highlighting a project we were able to complete with Lancaster County Solid Waste Management Authority as a partner. It's an abandoned, flooded, inactive limestone quarry in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, located immediately adjacent to the Susquehanna River. Through a series of tests, through a series of studies, pump tests, and a number of other efforts, we were able to ultimately support and develop or enter into a water supply agreement for 425 million gallons of water supply storage in this asset for use during low flow management on the lower Susquehanna River. Working with Lancaster County Solid Waste Management Authority on this project, we felt made a great example of a public-private partnership effort in developing mitigation assets. Second example in the project operations category is a little bit more generic as it's outlined here, but the concept is a project at a public or private reservoir, and in which operations are modified to either make low flow releases or conservation releases continuously with the aim of restoring a more natural flow regime downstream and benefiting the downstream environment. An example the Commission has in its portfolio of projects would be the Whitney Point Lake project in Broome County, New York, where through study, modeling, and ultimately a revised operations plan, we're able to implement environmental releases at that project for downstream benefits. Third of four project examples here is in the demand modification category. This one's conceptual as well. Think about an industrial water user that consumes water through evaporative cooling, and a project that would implement water conservation technology to reduce those water losses or consumptive use, ultimately improving water savings and plume abatement. We have a project we're currently partnering on as a pilot on a waste energy facility where we hope to work on implementing a technology to capture water and save water at that facility and reduce its water use footprint. But obviously there could be a host of other project examples in the water conservation environment that would be eligible in this category. The last of four, an environmental and water quality project example. This is one we're currently working on with the Upper Susquehanna Coalition in Steuben County, New York. It entails a 100-acre property acquisition, and you could see from the photograph below the property's quite wet, which lends itself to wetland and riparian buffer restoration work to enhance the existing wetland features that are out there. Ultimately, this acquisition is intended to be dedicated as state land in New York State, and this is a good example, we feel, of a multi-agency conservation group partnership to develop an environmental and water quality project type in New York State. To funding, and just to call out right up front something that we think is a unique attribute about our grant program and came up several times in year one discussions with applicants and during our outreach is our funds are non-federal, non-state, and basically that means that other state and federal grant funds could be leveraged and committed to meet our cash match requirement under this grant program. That's somewhat unique to other grant programs that are out there, and something we feel like eligible projects and applicants could really take advantage of. Our planned total grant funding under the program this year, again, is in the $4 to $6 million range. Nothing has changed there. In year one of the grant program, we awarded funding to 14 projects out of the 31 applications that we received. And I think the total grant funding rounded out to just under $6.5 million. So we were at the upper end of our range there. We again cited an expectation of individual project funding at or around $100,000 or more. That doesn't mean projects that request funds under $100,000 are ineligible. It's just expressing the Commission's preference to target somewhat larger, more impactful projects as a preference. Here, under minimum cash match, is a change we made this year relative to last year. Last year's year one program had a flat minimum cash match of 10% of the total requested funds. This year, we've modified that to a tiered arrangement based on the amount of the magnitude of the total request. So it's 10% if the total requested funds by an applicant is less than or equal to $500,000, and 25% minimum cash match requirement for projects requesting greater than $500,000 in total funds. The grant period of performance, again, is 3 years, meaning we would expect from grant application, agreement execution to project completion, that span would be less than or equal to 3 years in duration. Again, I'll pause for a second. I think we have maybe 5 more slides, and encourage folks certainly, and you don't have to wait till the end to post any questions you may have in the chat, and Pierre here in the room will be compiling those so that we can work through them and try to respond to as many of those as we can. In terms of applications, we have built an online application system. It's the same general system as last year with many improvements and enhancements this year. All applications must be submitted through that online application system to be considered eligible under the grant program. This slide outlines some of the key components of that grant, online grant application. I have the link cited here, and it's pasted all over our materials on our website. Pretty classic grant application information in terms of info about the applicant, the project in general terms. We really made a concerted effort to define a space for projects to define their benefits in terms of water quantity and water quality improvements. We haven't gone as far as to create a cost-benefit analysis requirement, but we're getting closer to trying to quantify or estimate the benefits of projects so we can weigh them against the requested funds in helping to inform our selection process. We also built in a project tasks and budget table, which replaced an upload we had last year for basically scope and budget, and we hope that can more formalize, standardize the process, be less burdensome for applicants, and be more usable immediately out of the application for us in reviewing applications submitted. Project partners, there are some uploads. We've whittled down the mandatory ones. Currently, they include matching funds commitment letter, because matching funds is a key eligibility requirement for us, but also project experience. And then there are a host of other optional uploads that can be it can be uploaded to the application where applicable, and then obviously signature and submit page at the end, which closes out and formally submits the application. We had a few towards the end of the application period last year that I think kind of hung in limbo a little bit, and we were able to track those and nudge applicants to make sure that they went through that last step and actually went through if they invested the time that they actually submitted the application to us. I think this is the last slide. We wanted to spell out some application expectations this year, both to help make our lives easier, but also hopefully make applicants' lives easier in developing and submitting an application. Again, as we mentioned right out of the gates, we really encourage everyone to go in and look at the grant program guidelines, look at the details of that, use it in developing and submitting your application. It contains all the information that emphasizes priorities we have, things we'll be looking at in application reviews and so forth. We won't be having or holding pre-application meetings and discussing project specifics at this time or in this grant cycle, as just like we didn't last year. Please direct any questions to our email account dedicated phone line, and we'll do our best to answer questions on logistics, whether it's relevant to the application, clarification on the guidelines. Certainly pose them there, but again, we won't be answering project specifics aimed at trying to assess the eligibility of a project. We've laid that out in the guidelines and really want to drive projects there to get that. We expect project attributes, the components of a project, to be described concisely in the application, and that's where many of our improvements this year were focused. We already talked about the water quantity, quality benefits, and our desire and intent there of getting that information more clearly expressed in an application. And then the last two, again, are really eligibility related. The cash match is a requirement that needs to be satisfied, and the two required uploads definitely need to be in an application. And the next slide will explain the importance of those two in particular and how we've structured our review process in evaluating applications received. So in application reviews, we will retrieve. Our first step will be to assess them against primarily the cash match requirement, whether the applicant's eligible and the project type is eligible, and then that the two required uploads were provided in the application. And that first step will be critical to ensuring projects make it through the administrative screening process and actually get into detailed review by our staff. The same as we did last year, all eligible applications, again, ones that make it through that first step administrative screening, will be reviewed by a committee of 8 of our staff with varying levels of expertise, seniority, technical program representation, and so forth. We have detailed standing instructions for application reviews, and we have a detailed scoring sheet that we use in evaluating the projects. The evaluation criteria were really transparent in what it is. It's spelled out in a specific section of the grant program guidelines. This slide highlights a few key excerpts of that. Again, the benefits piece is key. The graphic on the right shows watersheds we've identified as priorities. Again, that doesn't mean proposed projects and other watersheds won't be considered, but ones that are in these priority watersheds will be given a bit more preference in terms of scoring allocation. Another key criteria outlined in the guidelines is that the majority of requested funds are focused on project implementation instead of perhaps planning and upfront work. Like a lot of grant programs, we certainly have a preference to more shovel-ready or implementable projects. So in terms of suggestions for applicants, please review the evaluation criteria section of the guidelines, and applications that are received that hit on as many of those evaluation criteria as they can will certainly increase the chances of an application receiving a more favorable score through the process. So that, I'm going to run through the schedule quick, and then we'll turn things over for Q&A. We're coming up at the 10:30 mark here. Again, we went live with open application period November 1, and applications will be due to the Commission at the end of January on the 31st. Generally, we plan to review applications in the February to March timeframe. We did that last year, and we're able to track on our schedule here with 31 applications. Obviously, if that doubled or tripled, we might need to create some more space there for us to get through the process that we've designed, and we certainly would do so. If we get a manageable amount of applications and can meet that mark, we would plan to announce selected projects for funding in the April timeframe, and that would allow us then to transition to working towards getting agreements in place, getting final project scopes of work and budgets as attachments to those agreements in place, lining up the required funding via a budget request that our budget, that our commissioners adopt at our June quarterly business meeting, so that we're ready to go with being able to execute grant agreements and have the funding approved to allocate when our fiscal year begins on July 1 of 2023. So with that, that concludes the presentation portion of today's session. We'll open things up for questions and answers. Again, I'm here with Andy Gavin, our Deputy Executive Director, a number of our other staff and grant program folks. Happy to entertain any of your questions. Please list those in the chat, and we'll do our best to work through them. Again, there are some links here that have been shown in the presentation before. Our website contains all the information relative to the application, grant program guidelines, upload document templates, and so forth. Any questions after today's session, feel free to send them to the dedicated email and phone account. And we'll pause here for a minute or two till we get our heads around the questions we've received so far, and we'll come back in a second and start providing some response.